Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another review of another Challenge All-Star season. Here we're talking about Challenge All-Stars 4, a season that had a lot of hype coming into it, especially considering how delayed of a release this was, where considering the fact that the season was filmed over a year before it eventually aired, and considering how great of a cast season had, again, it definitely led to a lot of hype for this season. And did it deliver? Kind of. I mean, I think it is a solid season of the challenge. I think it is a season that is, again, on par with some of the other better spin-offs of the show. That doesn't really escalate to the best challenge we've ever seen. I don't think so. But in comparison to a lot of modern challenge, I do think it is, again, better than a lot of it. So where it is a season that, again, I thought was a mostly fun ride, even though it may have not lived up to highest expectations that I actually had for it coming into it. But with, again, I'll still be talking about my thoughts on the season from beginning to end. Starting it off with episode 1, which I did find it super funny. The season starts off with this monologue about how back in 1998, America's fifth sport was born, to which they proceed to show the season 2 logo, where there's just so much wrong with all this. But finally, we always get introduced to the cast here, which again is a very strong cast, where while I do think All-Stars 3 had a more competitive cast, I do feel like this was a cast that still had some of those great competitors, but also had some great characters in it as well, along with a pretty decent grouping of players that wanted to prove themselves, wanted redemption from their OG runs, along with also some returns of some pretty big names that hadn't been on the show in a while, to where this ends up being a pretty exciting group here, which again added to a lot of the hype that there was pre-season. And again, from a pure casting front, I do think it mostly delivered, again, really feeling like the perfect type of cast to fit an all-star season like this, perfectly fitting into the tone that the show wants to have. And speaking of tone, during this initial monologue, we also have weird old sitcom style intros here for the players. Thus seeing them all being given nicknames, obviously clearly playing into this lighthearted tone that the show is supposed to have, though I will say some of these names were kind of ridiculous, very uninspired, from the likes of Brad being called the Beard, Tony being called Tony Time, Steve is the hand model, and obviously Ace is just the dude. But the season properly starts with everyone walking through a cornfield, with TJ eventually showing up on a bike, because it's old school. But here we learn the initial basis of the format here, the fact that it is a individual game with only one winner at the end, which I'll be honest, I never particularly liked. I, one, find it kind of cheap that they're only willing to give one person a substantial prize, but even beyond that, I do feel like it typically leads to unfair challenges here. Now, to be fair, I do feel like the women field on this season ends up being extremely strong, where it ends up leading to a bit more balanced of a cast here between the sexes, to where that definitely helped, but still, I just never particularly like the concept of having only one winner on a show based around physicality like this. But we do learn that the winner gets $250,000 as expected, though I did find it very strange that the only other prize pot available is for people that finish the final, to which they will end up splitting $50,000, which felt like a pathetic amount of money there. So again, just really funny how cheap challenge production is on prize money. But anyway, at this point we do get to the mat chat, where we get our proper introductions to a lot of this cast. First, starting it off with TJ being really happy to see Leroy, who is there with Cam as well, where again, it was nice to see them back here. Now, it was weird to see Leroy back here so early after his retirement in Double Agents, but I always liked Leroy, and I'm fine with him back here, even though it ends up being a pretty rocky season for him, and also cool to see Cam back here as well, especially with it being so soon after she had a kid, being the first time that she's on the challenge after having a kid, which I do think it led to a different type of Cam than what we've seen before. So I will say the general concept of casting Cam on this season was a bit of a question mark for me, specifically for All-Stars, where obviously All-Stars is a show that's supposed to focus on these old school competitors. However, Cam is someone that literally just started on season 31 and wasn't from Real World or Road Rules or even Fresh Meat that All-Stars cast up to this point have been from, but it's not something I'm that particularly bothered by. I feel like Cam is someone that, while, again, she is a very recent challenge competitor, I didn't really bat an eye, personally, at Cam being here. I do think it makes sense that she's here, especially there with Leroy, and yeah, at least she's still from the MTV world. She still has this big enough legacy to where, again, I think it makes sense that she's here. So again, if we were going to transition any of the more modern challenge competitors onto All-Stars, I do feel like Cam is kind of the perfect fit for that. But obviously, through having Leroy and Cam here, this obviously gives them a massive advantage. I mean, obviously, we've already seen them play together in Double Agents, and they completely ran the show there, and obviously they seem extremely poised to do the same thing here. But through it, so we obviously get a lot of personal content from them, talking about parenthood and how much they've changed since having a kid, which is funny considering literally since filming they've had another kid, which is very strange to think about. But following that, we get a fun reintroduction to Tony, who also is back after a bit of a break. So it is funny, the dichotomy in his confessionals of him starting off by talking about how he's family first. He talks about his fiance, only for then a lot of the rest of his confessionals to contain some dodo content in it. But here we also get introduced to Kifla, who hasn't been on the show since season 2, with him talking about it's been 25 years, which again was cool to see here. I really like when they get these style of casting choices for All Stars, people that you never really expect to ever see again, and these people that never actually even properly played the real show. Obviously season 2 is just a radically different show than what we have now, where again I thought Kifla was a very inspired choice here, along with Flora as well, who did play a little bit more recently than Kifla, but still Flora also someone I was not expecting on this cast. Very excited to see her there, even though she had no real clue what she was doing on this season, where she even gets dubbed in that intro as "What did I sign up for?" But she ends up having some humorous confessionals through this season, though neither of them were set up particularly well in the game, where both of them had very few confessionals, and Flora even saying to that she's already shit herself 3 times about it. But also following this, we get reintroduced to the Nicole and Laurel dynamic, which I was expecting to be really entertaining on the show, considering how much drama we saw with them post-season, though really I didn't find much of this content that entertaining from my point of view. Obviously, through the season, they were going to reconcile briefly, to where, despite that, we do see Laurel being extremely dismissive of her. Though, very strange that throughout this intro, we do then get them deciding to show future footage to show them arguing on this season, during which they spoiled the episode 2 daily for some reason, which is like, why'd you have to include that? But also here we get some, again, pretty notable returns. We get the return of Rachel, which was really cool to see here. Again, obviously someone that is a massive name in the challenge world, though also one that kind of felt inevitable considering how involved she was in the challenge property recently, to where, again, not fully unexpected, but again, very cool to see her back, especially alongside Veronica and Tina. So again, it's just so surreal to see the 3 of them back together on a reality show in the modern day. But also with that, we get the return of Cara Maria, which also was very cool to see. And Cara hasn't been on the show since World of Worlds 2, and there felt like there was this period where maybe she was never going to come back. Yet here she is on a proper season, and she really hasn't lost a step here. So I'm very happy to have her back in the normal rotation, where she still shows herself to be a very formidable competitor on this season, one that also could still start some drama as well. But following this, we do go back to the house just for more intros from other players. First from Jay, who talks about still being remembered as a person who couldn't hold down the drink, to where this sets up his redemption arc, to which I will say I do think Jay came off mostly likable throughout his run here. Now beyond that, we also get content from Ayana, who talks to Cam, really hyping her up, again, really setting up their dynamic as a sympathetic one, even though their relationship ends up being extremely strained by the end of it, which made all this kind of strange. But here we also see Veronica telling Adam that they're not called missions anymore and they're called dailies, leading to Adam getting some content here of him saying that he used to be a hyperactive, ego-driven man, and Adam 3.0 barely survived, and now he hopes to be Adam 4.0. And I thought this was pretty decent content from Adam, who, again, on his OG run, definitely came off as a hyperactive, ego-driven man, yet I thought he came off mostly likable on his appearance here. Now, obviously, we also have to get personal content about the 2 later arena participants, to where we get Tyree getting personal content, talking about now being a personal trainer, and how he has a daughter now. I've personally always liked Tyree, where obviously he's not a particularly good challenge competitor, but I was personally happy to see him get another shot on this season. Along the fact that I was also very happy to see Steve back here as well, where we do get some bizarre content from Steve, him really playing into the fact that he's a hand model once again, with him talking about how COVID took a toll on his hands, as he was doing very well with all the hand jobs he was doing, but he got sick and his hands got red and rough, and people don't like those type of hand jobs, where you see the producer break in the background, where again, all this was pretty fun content, obviously just very juvenile style of humor, though I did find it funny. But anyway, we get to the daily, where we once again get this very surreal moment of EJ just out of the blue mentioning that the location's known for their apples, to which a producer throws an apple at him over and over again, only from the miss and eventually catch it, which is again just playing into this lighthearted tone that the show tries to have, but also just still very strange that this was in the cut. This is where we learn the rest of the format. The fact that to run the final, you need a star, aka a modified version of skulls, and also being very similar to the island format as well, where through the eliminations, you'll be fighting for possession of these stars. Though I did mostly like how these were handled on this season, where unlike the skulls, you don't actually need to go into elimination to get a star, or to even have a star being taken from you, as the elim winner for every episode can essentially take a star from anybody that isn't a daily winner, while also they can give a star to anybody else as well. And I thought this was an interesting dynamic to add here, adding more layers to the strategy of the stars on this season, where while I did find that a lot of the obsession over needing a star early on this season being kind of ridiculous considering just how much time there was to eventually get a star, I still found there'd be interesting dynamics to be played here and how players played around this. But the announcement of the stars here does again lead to another weird moment of EJ talking to Steve about his hands and tells him to come over here, you beautiful bastard, getting him to be a hand model and showing off the stars, which was just all very strange. But here we do learn that the top 3 men and women in the daily here will end up becoming the first star holders, to which I will say kind of strange that the stars are made to be equal gendered, where you would think it wouldn't matter as much concerning the fact that the winner can be any gender, though obviously I guess they wanted to balance it out coming into the final at least. As for how the eliminations will be decided, we do learn that the winning group here will be automatically safe, but strangely have almost no power, which was strange, while the bottom, or men and women from this daily, end up being the losing group, to where the losing group ends up being the only people eligible to be thrown into elimination, while the people with the actual power are the middle group, the people who aren't the winners or aren't the losers, to where they will decide both nominees. A format I don't particularly love. I do think this is something that I just found strange, this decision to really not have that much of incentive of winning the daily, as you actually have more power by not winning than by winning, where obviously by winning you can keep your star safe and also have the chance of throwing yourself into elimination to win a star. But I feel like that was almost never really worth it, to where, and this was just a weird dynamic for me, and the fact that it was actually much more beneficial for you to be a middle player as you decide on both nominees. Like, I don't get why it was in a situation where the middle picks one nominee and the top picks one nominee. I think that would have made a lot more sense. But through this again, there's just very little incentive for you to actually go on to win challenge, though again, we never really see many people not trying to win. But anyway, we get to the daily itself, which has them going back and forth between boxes to find the right star for each box. A seemingly difficult challenge here, and the fact that they were doing so in extreme heat. Though here we do see Cara Maria actually end up being the first out of everybody here, which is a very impressive showing for her return to the show here. Throw on the women's side of things, Avery ends up coming in second, despite her being pretty quiet throughout most of this episode. Rachel ends up coming in third, to where I will say I was pretty surprised at the fact that Laurel did not make top 3, and it was actually towards the back of the pack here, where she ends up having a pretty quiet episode as a whole outside of her Nicole content. On the men's side of things, we see Brad coming in first, which is funny considering how bad the rest of his season is. We see Adam come in second and Brandon come in third, with him also having a pretty quiet episode here, though I was personally still very happy to see Brandon back on the show. He's someone that I very much liked during his OG run on the show and had been wanting to come back, especially considering he had been an alternate for recent seasons. So again, I was very pleasantly surprised to see him perform well on his return here. But following that, we do see Kifla be the 4th guy to finish. We do see him getting emotional after seeing his name on the challenge after 25 years, which again, I thought was pretty sympathetic content there. We also get a pretty fun moment from Tony here, where again, this entire challenge is this big dodo moment for him. First, in the fact that he talks about how confident he is, only for him to get the first star wrong, and when he does eventually finish, we see him diving for the flag, only to accidentally pull Veronica's, which again was all pretty funny. But here we do see Leroy really sucking. It was a pretty big surprise to see him doing as bad as he did here, So he ends up being part of the losing group alongside Tyree, who again was kind of disappointing to see him do so poorly here, even though again not fully unexpected. But again, we see him doing really well through the first 2 stars, only for him to lose all momentum after that. But here we do learn that it will be a male elimination day, meaning that the only eligible people to be nominated are Leroy, Derek, Tyree, and Steve. With obviously Cam putting in a lot of legwork here in saving Leroy, which is obviously the benefit of them both being in the game at this point. They're also considering how many allies they had. Again, it just made it so people were kind of scared to go against them under the fear of the rest of the cast turning against them. Or again, that kept Leroy safe in this spot. Oh, we see Derek also being very well connected socially, having Ryan fighting for him, and also having connections to Jasmine and Avery that kept him safe, to where through that it pretty much by default leaves Tyree and Steve as the ones going into elimination here, and setting up this potential redemption arc for Tyree of him constantly going to the first elimination and having never won an elimination, to where again I was hoping that he could get redemption in this moment, but then he doesn't. To get to the arena to where the elimination has them going into a pool and find 12 balls with stars on them. Really feeling like a challenge that you would typically see on like Big Brother more so than a challenge. And I was kind of sad at both Tyree and Steve being in elimination areas. I really did like both of them. But again, even more tragic for Tyree here in the sense that we do see Tyree in the initial lead, only for Steve to have the strategy of finding multiple at a time and storing them, which I'll say was kind of a dumb strategy for a challenge like this, as Tyree could also find them if he knew that that's what he was doing. But anyway, we get to the point where Tyree just needs one more, but Steve ends up pulling out the win here. Again, kind of being this sorrowful exit for Tyree. So again, I was hoping for this like Big Easy style redemption for him, though it never really comes. But with that, we do have Steve now having the decision on whose star to steal, to which he takes Brandon's, which kind of obviously, I mean, he has connections to both Brad and Adam, while it doesn't seem like he really has much of one with Brandon. Also, Brandon came in third in the challenge, to where it's also an easy excuse, to where again, it was just kind of a obvious pick here. But we do end the episode with Cara saying that she has a Stargate on her back, which I'm sure she won't end up saying a billion times in this season. But with that, again, we do end up losing Tyree in this episode, who I was very disappointed to lose here. As I said, again, I really like Tyree in his original run. I always felt like he seemed like a very affable guy. For a while, again, he is a bad challenge competitor, has never won elimination, has been on 6 seasons. Yeah, it's not a good record, but I always liked him. I've always been rooting for him. I want him to pull out elimination win at some point. It felt like this is one that he could finally do. Again, he was 1 ball away from beating Steve. Obviously, it wasn't good enough, but again, I would not be opposed to seeing Tyree back again. I'm sure most people will probably be at the point where they just don't want to ever see him back. I still would like to see him back, at least until he wins elimination and get that redemption. Where again, I definitely thought that there was some Big Easy potential for him, though obviously it just never really came to be. Now for episode 2, where we start off with the previously on segment, which is voiced by Steve, which was weird, but obviously it turns out that the previously ons are voiced by the previous elimination winners, which is actually kind of a cool gimmick for this season, though it did lead to some very awkward ADR at points. But really a lot of this episode does end up focusing around Ayana, with us seeing right away people talking about how she gets in her own way, and that and we see her fractured relationship with Janelle, along with both Cam and Jasmine talking about their annoyances with her. I wonder if that'll be relevant. Oh, we then get Tina talking about how she's happy to be here with Veronica and Rachel, them clearly being targeted by most of the house, with us finally getting Avery on the show at this point, where she talks about how she doesn't trust them, which, again, I wonder if that'll be relevant also. To which we follow that up with more Nicole and Laurel content, which will definitely not get repetitive on this season. Again, obviously they essentially end up being the new Jordan and Tori, of us getting this episodic checkup on their relationship when it's like, who cares? But anyway, we come to the daily where TJ comes out in a Winnebago, to where we obviously get talk about this being a reference to road rules, to which the challenge itself ends up being kind of lame, of them having to play in teams of 4, except for one team of 3, which is dumb. It gives that team a massive disadvantage. Anyway, they have to get in the van spins around, all while they have to listen for clues, where we get this memorization portion followed by a road rules puzzle. Again, all a boring challenge here. Though we do see the team of Laurel, Nicole, Jay, and Tony win the daily, which again, they definitely didn't spoil in the previous episode. To which again, after they win, we see arguing between Laurel and Nicole, because obviously, anyway, it ends up being a female elimination day with Tina, Janelle, and Jasmine being the only ones eligible to be nominated here. Again, the pool being this small because of the 3-person team that ended up losing that only had 1 woman on it. But here we do see Janelle instantly telling others to put her into elimination, with us seeing her tell Ayanna this, with her saying here that she thinks Tina will be safe due to her relationships, but really which one goes down doesn't matter to her, which Ayanna is annoyed at all of this. First at the fact that she doesn't say whose star she's gonna take, which I don't know why that's particularly relevant to Ayanna, but also at least Ayanna just making up stuff here and pretending like Janelle was campaigning against Jasmine when really it was just a statement that she expects Jasmine to be voted in. Even though, again, that wasn't really true, but either way. All this is portrayed on the show as if this fun, chaotic content for Ayanna, with her saying it's all part of her crazy. And this does lead to a lot of drama here, obviously, with Janelle saying that she would never say that. We see her getting extremely emotional. Tina doesn't believe her, and then we see Ayanna saying that she's done this before, and that her gameplay is to gaslight people, which is kind of Ayanna's gameplay style. But again, it's weird how the show portrays this as fun when it was really anything but that from what we've heard from behind the scenes stuff, where and obviously the show is very much hiding what actually happened here, and the fact that again we see this like massive reaction from Janelle that does feel out of place considering the context of what happened. But the reality is that supposedly this all stemmed from Ayanna making racist allegations against Janelle, obviously making this a much more serious argument than what the show portrayed it as, with again the show showing this as it was all about gameplay when obviously there were these much deeper topics being talked about here. And because of that, it leaves this episode being a bit strange in my mind, where again, I know this context from outside the show, and because that makes me cognizant that this is the reality of what's happening in the episode, yet the way the show portrays it is again as this like fun character moment for Ayanna, and seeing her be this like chaos agent, when I feel like the reality of the situation is something that does deter from the show, where again, that would turn this into this really dark moment here of her essentially trying to demerit Janelle's character by making these racist allegations against her, which from what I understand are completely uninstantiated. But with that, we shockingly get Avery being set up as a swing vote. Again, who would have guessed, where we do see Tina doing some very questionable work here with Avery. They're trying to campaign to her, but which just irritates Avery even more. So again, we do strangely see Avery talk about how it's so overwhelming because she's been out of the game for so long. I guess, again, in comparison to a lot of other members on this cast, has been nearly as long for her than them, but whatever. But again, this is the first time that we see Veronica talking about how Tina is not the best political player, which who would have guessed? But and this is funny because like this gets mentioned constantly until Tina's eventual boot, seemingly like every episode up until that point. But anyway, we get to the nominations where Tina clearly gets voted in here, with Jasmine actually seeming to be pretty well integrated at this point in the game. So by the time that we see Ayanna getting to vote, we do get again what is portrayed as this really fun character moment for her just stammering around and going on this massive spiel about how she doesn't want to vote for either of them, and saying that she would never vote Jasmine in, only for her to vote Jasmine in. So we do see Leroy being confused here, leading to Ayanna being upset that he's putting words in her mouth. And again, this ends up being this ridiculous argument here to where Leroy does end up being genuinely upset through this fight. Again, something that you rarely see from Leroy, to where again, I think the fact that you see Leroy being this upset in this fight against Ayanna really just shows you how terrible Ayanna must have been to live with here. But anyway, Janelle and Tina end up being nominated here, to which we follow that up with Janelle saying that she's leaving and that she doesn't want to be part of this anymore, with Janelle saying that she wants to be free from the toxic energy. And again, we do strangely get Ayanna again getting the final word here and saying how disrespectful it is for her to leave and good riddance, which again feels weird considering the context of all this. So while obviously I am disappointed to see Janelle quit the game here in a spot where again I thought Janelle definitely had a really strong run in her on this season, and again putting this in a spot where she'll probably never play again. I do also understand her perspective on this. Again, like, she doesn't need the show, and she has a very decent living outside of this, to where I can fully understand why she just thinks it's not really worth going through this hassle for. And again, I do find it funny how we follow up Janelle quitting the game here with Laura and Nicole arguing again. because obviously that was necessary content. But anyway, we get to the arena where clearly the challenge was going to be canceled here. I mean, there was so little time left in the episode. But we do end up getting the explanation of the elimination challenge, it being one where they have to memorize a cheat code and replicate it on a controller, to which, again, I wonder if we'll ever see this elim again. But we get the reveal that the elimination will only occur if one of the two winning women decide to step down and take out Tina, which neither of them do. Meaning that Tina wins by default, and she steals Avery's star. Who would have guessed? Again, I definitely never would have guessed any of these things happening. Anyway, with that, we obviously lose Janelle through this episode, which was a shame to lose Janelle. I mean, as I mentioned, again, I thought she had a good run in her. I do like Janelle. Like, I always found her to be one of the more affable people on the show, and she does have a really good record on the show. So again, seeing her return for All-Stars 4 here, again, she was definitely a contender to win it all, though, and again, obviously leaves due to some unfortunate circumstances, which, again, I'm expecting to never see her again after this, which I think is also a shame, though. Really, her leaving here, I think, is probably for the better of the season. So again, I think either way, she would have been checked out after the Ayanna situation, to where, again, her recognizing her deteriorating mental health due to it and leaving the game because of it, again, I could fully understand why she would make that decision, to where I don't really fault her too much for it. But with that, we get to episode 3, where we start off the episode with obvious Leroy and Cam personal content like we get most episodes. But also here we do get a setup to the Rachel and Ayanna relationship, which again comes out left field on the show. Ayanna talking about how Rachel gave her the motivation to lose weight, which kind of felt like a promotion for Rachel in this instance. But again, this was clearly being set up to them going to elimination together. That felt like the only reason why this was here was because this relation was obviously going to be played up for drama down the road. But for the daily, we do get a shocking reveal here, and the fact that Tony, just out of the blue, says that he's leaving due to something happening to his brother, which again was a shame to lose Tony in this instance. Where I was personally really excited to see Tony back, and I thought he had a lot of potential on the season. He seemed to be performing pretty well. So for that to all be cut short here, seemingly due to a family emergency, was again disappointing to see, though obviously I fully understand why he had to do it. Yeah, I do think he brought some good character moments along the way that, again, I'm excited to see what Tony does down the road on the challenge. So again, I do hope that this leads to Tony being back in the rotation for the show moving forward. But after he leaves, we do see Laurel consoling Nicole, leading to their relationship seeming to mend in this instance, meaning that we get to get more of them down the road, so yay. But anyway, we get to the daily where we get the reveal that there's a replacement for Tony here, that being Cyrus, which was fine. I mean, I like Cyrus. I think Cyrus is one of the more likable challenge presences, but also I think it's clear why he's always an alternate here. Or it is funny that he comes in here, we talk about how he's in the best shape of his life and that he expects to win, which I'm pretty sure was also his storyline in All-Stars 3. But again, with Cyrus coming in here, especially late, to where obviously he's going to struggle with the social dynamics, obviously just expect him to be a goner pretty soon afterwards, to where with that we also get the reveal here that this will also be a double elimination day, meaning that Cyrus is pretty much screwed unless he wins. And what do you know, he doesn't. But anyway, the daily itself ends up being named Domino Motherfucker, which I did find very strange as a challenge title, but has them working in pairs and matching and lining up the dominoes. Again, another pretty boring challenge here, one that was very difficult to even determine who is doing well in, considering they were all going at once. It was just hard to keep track of what exactly was going on here. But we do see Adam and Avery winning the challenge out of nowhere, with Avery saying that she's playing for Adam, really implying them having this really close relationship that doesn't properly get focused on their show, which again, considering the fact that we knew that they were in a relationship post-show, which clearly started on this season, it was very strange to see that not being talked about up to this point. But beyond that, we do see Leroy ending up in the losing group once again, alongside pretty much all of the old schoolers that obviously weren't that well connected, making the upcoming votes pretty simple, especially on the guys side of things, where Cyrus and Kefla do get a nice bonding moment here, talking about it's cool to see each other after a while, though obviously this is setting them up for being in elimination together. While on the other side of things, we get more drama surrounding Ayanna, with Brandon revealing that he heard Ayanna telling the Cyrus at the challenge that people are going for Leroy and Cam, with Brandon telling Cam and Leroy about this, leading to Cam confronting Ayanna, leading to this massive fight between the two, with Ayanna wanting Cam to just call out the people that said this, and her obviously not buying into that. While this also leads into a big fight between her and Jasmine. Again, another really fun fight for the show, but one that was, again, probably very frustrating for the players actually in the game. But again, with this, we do see Rachel calming Ayanna down, with Rachel also now thinking that she's probably going in, where we do see her do some last-second campaigning here to Kara, with Kara agreeing to look out for her, which I wonder if that'll factor into things, where you get the nominations, where Kefla and Cyrus are voted in without any debate, though on the women's side of things, we do get some debate, where while it is pretty clear that Ayanna is going in, we do see the majority wanting Ayanna to go in with Rachel, with Cam saying that she wants support in making this go through, which Kara doesn't do, obviously due to her deal with Rachel, upsetting Cam to where essentially from this point forward, Cam is against Kara the rest of the season, which is very strange considering the fact that, again, Cam and Kara were friends last time we saw. I was in War of the Worlds 2, they worked very close on that season, and seeing Cam seemingly just destroy that friendship because she wouldn't vote in Rachel when Rachel's already going in anyway, this seemed ridiculous. And I always liked Cam, and I always did look at Cam as one of the better strategists in the challenge, though I think this is kind of a point in this season where I did very much question that, where, well, Cam is very effective in getting her way as she does here, I do feel like she does act very rashly at points, and again, the way that she treats Kara following this being very questionable, even though, again, at the end of the day, I understand why you would want Kara out. Obviously, Kara is a massive threat in the final, and with this being an individual game, I understand why a lot of these people are targeting Kara at this point, but I feel like for Cam in particular, there wasn't really that much reason for it, especially this early on in the game, to where Kara is a number for you, and there are other pretty equal threats in a final, particularly Laurel. Cam in particular never really had the Grace relationship with, where again, obviously they start to work together this season, but and you would think that she would want to target Laurel more so than Kara, but I guess not. But anyway, again, Rachel and Ayanna get voted in anyway, to where we get to the elimination, which ends up being a modification of Hall Brawl, kind of them being in this giant tube, though they have to push this ball out of the tube with the players on opposite sides of it. And again, it was essentially them trying to have this Hall Brawl style challenge without any physical contact, and again, it was fine. But obviously first we see Kefla versus Cyrus, which was a pretty mundane one, where just Kefla just easily wins this, to where there wasn't really much suspense, which is kind of a sad exit for Cyrus here, and even saying himself that he was gone in one day. Anyway, we also get the Ayanna versus Rachel matchup, which also is another one where Rachel pretty easily wins, which I will say, I'm surprised at how easy it was for Rachel to win this, where you think this would be the type of challenge that Ayanna would really excel in, and you needing this brute strength, yet Rachel just pretty easily wins here, to where we get a pretty weird moment as Ayanna loses, her yelling out her kids' names as the song True Colors plays, which was very surreal. Anyway, we follow this up with Kefla taking Brad's star, all while Rachel ends up asking, do I have to steal a star? To which we learn that yes, you are forced to, though obviously you can choose any star regardless of gender, to where this does lead to an interesting choice for Rachel, where she essentially has to pick between her own allies, as she can't pick herself obviously, and she now can't take Kefla's star, while Adam is also the challenge winner, meaning that she essentially has to choose between her own allies, picking between Steve, someone she's close with, Kara, who she previously just made a deal with, and Tina, who is obviously one of her close allies, where we do see her make the interesting choice here in picking Tina and giving the star to Veronica, kind of a nothing move with it, though I was actually pretty impressed with the move from Rachel's point of view, where I do think the initial instinct would be just to probably take Steve's star, as he's probably the one that she's the least connected with here, but I like the move of taking Tina's in a spot where obviously Tina didn't do anything to get her star outside of not quit. Or again, Tina can't be that upset at the fact that her star is taken, but also again, giving it to her other closest ally in Veronica. Again, I thought it was a pretty good political move there, though it's one that the show does kind of condemn, with Cam saying that she's playing a scared game. But anyway, with that, we do end up losing two people here. Let's talk about them. Starting it off with Cyrus, who is there. Yeah, and he was literally there for one episode. Didn't get much to do outside just seeing him catch up with Kefla, which again was a nice little moment, but again, didn't really have much to do. Was barely on the season. Other person is obviously Ayanna, and again, there's a lot to say about Ayanna. I think Ayanna is a great TV character. Again, if we're just simply taking the entertainment that she brings to the show, I thought she brought a lot of entertainment, obviously. Now, again, I think practically, when thinking about actually living with Ayanna and being in a game with Ayanna, it feels like a miserable experience. It feels like Ayanna is this very toxic personality that uses these kind of icky tactics, and also just in general is a very abrasive personality. So again, just having a strategic conversation with her would seem to be extremely frustrating, with you not being able to get a word in and her just continuously rambling on about nonsense, to where I can fully get why the players themselves on this season were completely frustrated with Ayanna and didn't want to work with her. But again, I do think the way the show was portrayed here, again, it did lead to her making some good TV, though that good TV might have come at the cost of some challenge careers, as, and obviously I don't expect Janelle to be back, and even then, I don't know if Ayanna will be back, considering I could definitely see a world where people just don't want to be on the season of Ayanna anymore, to where that could deter people from even accepting the show, to where I think as a whole, again, Ayanna ended up being good TV for this season, though I don't know what the long-term effects of that are. But now for episode 4, which ends up being a pretty strong episode here, one that is pretty jam-packed, where before the daily, we don't get much content here outside of just the setup of Cam not wanting to target Kara because she didn't stand with her, which again is still dumb. But again, coming into the daily, we do get a weird shot of everyone jumping, and as they proceed to land, we then cut to the daily of everyone now in their uniforms, and that was very strange, but I guess fitting within the tone of the show. But anyway, a truck comes out because obviously that makes for a good challenge, I guess, to where they do have to work in teams here to unbraid a rope and navigate through a maze. And really, I did find this challenge to be mostly boring, where despite the fact that this show really made a meal of how people were accidentally bumping into each other and how funny is this, it really just did not entertain me at all. Although we do see Laurel's team win the challenge here, they're claiming that she's coming back to being the old Laurel that can win, which felt like an arc that wasn't properly set up. But anyway, we do see Rachel, Kara, Nicole, and Veronica as part of the losing group here, with Rachel saying that she's screwed, as either way she's going to be put in against a strong woman in Kara or against her own number one ally in Veronica, which does lead to some content revolving around this red herring that Veronica could go in with Tina trying to save her, though again, never felt like it was actually a practicality here, though it does lead to Tina's political game getting dunked on again, because obviously. But again, this does set us up for a pretty great matchup in the arena, yet it clearly implying that Kara is going in here, sort of mixing down the fact that Rachel's obviously this massive threat on the board. It means that we're getting these two challenge legends going to elimination. But before we get to that, we do obviously have to have this episode's worth of Laurel and Nicole content, because obviously, though, through this we do eventually see that Cam and Laurel end up talking to where they agree to target Kara together. An interesting alliance to see come together here, that obviously, like, very strange if you were telling me coming into the season that Cam would be working with Laurel instead of Kara. But again, this alliance gets set up here only for it to not particularly matter in this situation, as both of them are on the winning team, meaning that they can't actually vote. To where instead we obviously end up focusing a lot more on the middle group, which was just the second place team, which was dumb. But a lot of focus gets put on Jasmine and Brandon, with Kara having mentioned beforehand that she doesn't trust this middle group outside of Jasmine and Brandon. And we obviously get the setup of Kara and Brandon's relationship from their OG runs, and Kara saying that Brandon's her number one, only for him to obviously target her. Which again, like Cam, I do also think is a questionable move from Brandon here. Now, obviously at the end of the day, I think he doesn't feel the connection to Kara that Kara feels to him. I still think knowing that Kara does have that connection to him means that, again, keep Kara in the game then. And she's someone that is going to protect you in the game. She's someone that's a lot more amenable than certain other people in the game, to where, while I get the concept of her being a threat in the game, especially for down the road, again, we're so early on in the season. We're, what, third of the way through? I think it's ridiculous that you're going for Kara in this spot, but whatever. We do get to nominations where, funnily, Tina ends up trying to vote last here, seeming to do a Veronica from Dirty 30 and trying to find a way to mess up the vote at the very end, only for the others to just vote in Kara and Rachel anyway, where Tina then decides to just also vote in Kara and Rachel, which, I mean, really doesn't matter. Again, this was going through anyway, though this does cause some friction between her and Rachel, with Rachel being pissed, saying that you made yourself look dumb, which, I mean, yeah, she did, but also it's like, this doesn't really matter anyway. Again, Rachel was always going in no matter what. But this does end up being a blindside to Kara, with us seeing her confront Jasmine, leading to a series of fun confessionals from Jasmine over their fractured relationship now. But through this, we also see Cam calling Kara entitled, saying, "You didn't have my back, and now someone you thought had your back doesn't have yours." Which, again, these situations are not equal here, where it would be if Kara was targeting Cam at any point, which, again, there seems to be no indication that that was ever the case. So again, I think it's ridiculous that Cam even tries to make this parallel here. But anyway, we get to the arena where Cara does end up picking a fight here with Jasmine and Brandon, leading to some bickering between her and Jasmine, and Brandon ends up saying that you haven't talked to me in 8 years, which again is kind of fair from his point of view, but again, I still feel like there still has to be some connective tissue between the two, especially over likes of other players there. But with this, again, we're getting to this really epic elimination between Cara Maria and Rachel Robinson. This matchup people have been waiting for years. Till we get to the challenge, which is Star Slice. Them throwing stars at a board, and the first to hit 3 targets wins, which was so lame. Again, like for this epic matchup here, to where had it been something physical, it would have probably been one of the best eliminations of all time. It instead is just them throwing stars. And mixing that, the fact that there's also punishments doled out if you hit certain targets, it just leads to this being such a ridiculous challenge here, where both of them suck at it. I mean, both of them are terrible and miss the majority of their shots, to where we even get this dodo content from them completely missing the board, and we see the other players get tired and just sit down. Again, all this was so ridiculous. And despite the fact that Cara Maria actually ends up hitting one of her own targets at a point, she does end up winning this elimination, to where because she beat Rachel, someone who had a star, we now learn how this works in the show, and the fact that she has to take Rachel's star and must give it to another woman, now making it known that if 2 people with stars go into elimination, it really narrows down their possibilities of what to do with it, which I do think plays a factor down the road, and this actually being the point where the star actually does start to become a target on people's backs, and essentially star holders wanting to send other star holders in so they could protect their own star, which again I think is an interesting dynamic here. But with that, we see Cara make an interesting choice here in giving her star to Jasmine after having initially thought about giving it to Laurel, which again would have been interesting, though she did worry about the thought of her going into elimination with Laurel, which again we know how that goes, to where her giving the star to Jasmine again is an interesting choice. Obviously her goal here was putting a target on her, and to be fair, ends up being somewhat effective, though it is funny how the show completely dunks her for this, showing Cam calling her an idiot for doing so. But again, I think it's an understandable move here. But with that, we do lose Rachel, who again was cool to see back here. I mean, Rachel's someone that obviously is a big legend of the show, has been gone for quite a bit at this point, and to see her back for All Stars 4 again was really cool there. Also, obviously we know she's going to be back for Challenge 40. That will also be really cool to see. And obviously this wasn't a great run for her. I mean, she obviously gets eliminated pretty early on, though she didn't have that bad a performance on this season. I mean, she was competent in dailies. I feel like we rarely saw her making like any big mistakes in the game. I think she just came into the season being kind of low on the pecking order, with there kind of being this bigger majority from people that were kind of from middle school seasons of the show. Considering the fact she also had Veronica and Tina there with her, obviously increased the target on her back, to where again, like, I think she gets kind of unlucky in that light, but still, again, I thought it was fine on this season. I'm happy to see her back in the rotation for the challenge. With that, we then move on to episode 5, another pretty strong episode here. A lot of it revolving around Cara, where once again, we start off with Cara still being upset at Brandon and Jasmine, confronting Brandon, telling him it was a stupid game move and that was a big mistake. But obviously with all this, we're clearly setting up Brandon for a fall in this episode, with him even openly saying he's worried Cara's going to come after him, and we also get personal content from him talking about his daughter. So again, I wonder what's going to happen here. What do you know, we also follow this up with a lot of Leroy content as well. I wonder what that means. Where do you see Leroy trying to be the peacemaker here, trying to sit down Cara and Cam and get them to get back together, only for him to argue instead. Oh, Leroy also gets the setup of his relationship with Adam, which was very strange considering it didn't matter at all. Weird relationship to really set up here, but does lead into Leroy once again talking about his son, but also talking about his postpartum depression, which again, you don't typically see being represented from father side of things. So again, I thought that was an interesting thing to spotlight here. But again, with that, obviously made it clear that Leroy was also a contender to go home in this episode. But obviously, like every other episode before the daily, we also got to get our daily dose of Laurel and Nicole content, of them play fighting and eventually hooking up, which was obviously where this was all going. We're seeing the entire house seemingly being aware of the fact that Nicole was just playing Laurel in this instance, to where we see Flora warn Nicole about this, and we see Cara even consoling Laurel at a point, saying, "You have me," which made it seem like Cara and Laurel were going to make up and be friends again through the season, but no. But again, I do find it weird how there's a lot of just telling us and not really showing us in terms of the Laurel-Nicole dynamic, in terms of this idea that Laurel's more into Nicole than Nicole is into her, which is something that we don't really get through the raw footage of the show. But anyway, all this leads up into the daily, which ends up supposedly being a challenge from Duel 2, which I literally had absolutely no memory of. And even then, it wasn't even the exact same challenge. It was literally just them utilizing the same bobbleheads, where they have to wear these bobbleheads while doing the challenge, which the challenge itself has them having to bobsled down a track and grab bags of water along the way. And this was just a very strange challenge. To where, again, it's also like done in teams. And also we have like TJ bobsleighing down the track before they do to open the valve of the tube that they have to fill up with the water that they grab. And also we also learn that the results are tallied by a mixture of how quick they went and how much water they had left. And it's like, what is any of this? This is such a bizarre challenge. But anyway, we also do learn that it's a male elimination day. I would never have guessed that. To where Leroy says that if Cara wins, his ass is on the line. And what do you know? Leroy's team struggles with them going first and Brad missing almost all of their bags, leading to their team being annoyed at Brad, with Leroy even saying that he ruined my game and seeming to be genuinely pissed, which again is very rare for Leroy. And all this really starting this storyline about how much Brad sucks on this season. Though, like, truth be told, I feel like this is a challenge where whoever went first was always going to be kind of screwed. It's the type of challenge where you were definitely benefited from seeing other people try it out first and learning new strats from it. But here we do see Cam being part of the winning team, meaning that she can't do anything to save Leroy here, all while Cara is in the middle group, meaning that she has a lot of influence in the upcoming vote, making the nominees pretty apparent at this point, where we get to nominations. And Cara obviously leads the charge in getting both Leroy and Brandon up, with Adam also just voting for Leroy in this situation, which again makes the previous setup of their relationship kind of irrelevant, with Adam just saying that they're obviously just going to take a star anyway, as it turns out that the other two star holders had actually won the daily. So it is really funny that we're in a spot where by default Adam's star would have to be taken in this position, at least if they were going to take a guy's star, but obviously they were very likely to do so. And again, very strange that this is a format that even allows this to happen. Also a format that, again, theoretically all 3 star holders of a specific gender can be on the same team, to where if that does happen, it just leads to this weird situation where even if you win the elimination, you can't even get a star for yourself. Again, just a very strange aspect of the format that I thought was kind of dumb. But anyway, we get to the arena where we get a pretty mundane challenge here. It looking cool, at least. It being called Mission Improbable, which has them hanging like in Mission Impossible, but they're connected to a table maze that they control with their hands and feet. And again, it's cool, but it was really boring to watch. And who would have guessed it? Leroy wins here. What a shocker. So we do get this fun moment afterwards of Leroy asking Adam that if he promises that if Leroy doesn't take his star, will he promise to not take his? Only for Adam to just instantly say no, and Leroy being annoyed at him ruining his joke as he was going to take it anyway. Which again, just very clear to seemingly everybody that this was just an inevitability that Adam was going to lose his star in this situation. But with that, we do lose Brandon, who, again, I really like Brandon through his original run. I've always remembered his run in Cutthroat and that being a really notable one. I always liked him being eliminated in Fresh Meat 2 after getting drunk and not being able to participate in the elimination. And just beyond that, I mean, he's always been this like really rootable underdog figure. So again, I was happy to see him back here. I know he's been like an alternate for recent seasons. So again, happy to see him back here. And again, he's on 40 as well. So again, that's cool. And I thought he had a pretty decent run on this season. Again, he performed decently at challenges. He also, again, brought some entertainment to the show for sure, largely through, again, conflicts with Ayanna and then now with Cara Maria, to where, in general, I do feel like Brandon ended up being a pretty good choice for this season here. Tori's another one that I'm kind of happy is back in the rotation for the show. For a while, again, I don't know if he really has in him to actually win the show at some point. I do think there's still a lot of entertainment to be had where, again, at least he's going to play hard. And again, he can also still perform pretty well at the show. I would still like to see him at least make a deep run at some point down the road. Now for episode 6, which ends up being another pretty solid episode, though it's one that starts off very strangely here with us getting a previously on from Leroy that he struggles to even get through, with us seeing his numerous takes at the intro, which was all weird. But following that, we finally get Ryan on the show. again, finally, talking to Cara about Cam, setting him up as someone in the middle, I guess to give him something to do on the season. While Steve gets a segment here about being bored, and we see him doing weird workouts and reading shampoo bottles, which is also very strange. And also, obviously, before the daily, we gotta see Laurel and Nicole still hooking up. Because, again, obviously. But again, we do get to the daily, which is a 2-part challenge here, played in pairs, with part 1 essentially being them playing musical chairs. So the chairs they have to go to are in different sections of a stadium, and they have to race there, and the person left out ends up being eliminated alongside their partner, which I found to actually be a pretty fun challenge here. One that I'm genuinely confused at why this wasn't just the entire challenge, or instead this ends up just being a way to dole out a 30-second head start in phase 2, which was all very strange. We do actually get some focus on the partners getting picked here, to where we do see Cam and Leroy pairing up, along with the fact that we see Cara, who had been typically paired up with Ace, decide to not pair up with Ace on this challenge because Ace is supposedly injured and she doesn't want him weighing her down. Only for him to obviously do better than her, which obviously ends up being humorous considering the results. But here you see Brad sucking once again and him stumbling around, leading to him and Laurel being the first out here, which further shows him being a bit of a mess on this season, while we also see a tussle between Veronica and Jasmine, with Jasmine getting the last seat, only for it to turn out that Adam sat in the wrong seat and ends up getting eliminated instead, which was a fun result. But after that, we finally get Derek on the show, with him seemingly doing really well here, getting to each section first, getting propped up in the edit, only for him to be partnered up with Jasmine, who loses it for the two of them. Though again, who cares, as this was all just for a head start in phase 2, which is really dumb considering the amount of energy that they waste in running from section to section is probably not worth the 30-second head start, where we see this head start be pretty irrelevant in the actual main challenge, which ends up being them having to find tokens and balance out their weights, which was boring. But again, Ace and Nicole end up winning here, while Cara once again ends up being in the middle group with a decent chunk of her allies, meaning that she has a lot of influence here. While we also do learn that this is going to be another double elimination, which I do find it strange how on and off these double eliminations happen on this season, as to me it's like I feel like the way to do it was simply just to stack them all in a certain portion of the season to make it feel like it's actually a genuine part of the format, instead of this last second twist that just ends up being thrown in randomly here. But anyway, on the guy side, I mean, clearly Keefla and Steve were going in, as they were at least connected of those eligible, and also again with them being 2 star holders as well, which is kind of an easy excuse to throw them in. And with that, we do get content revolving around Keefla and him talking to his wife and wanting to open up a mental health facility, which was really sympathetic content for him. While we get set up to Steve's relationship with Ace, to where I wonder where that's gonna go. Meanwhile, on the women's side of things, we do get a lot more intrigue, where Cam wants to go in here to finally get her star, to where we see her actively campaigning for her to be thrown in alongside Tina, but Cara instead wants Jasmine and Veronica thrown in, to obviously again protect her star, as if the 2 star holders are in elimination, that means no one can take her star, as they're forced to take each other's, which is optimal play here for Cara on paper, though I do feel like, again, she becomes a bit too hung up on keeping her star in this situation, where considering how hard she has to fight to make this a reality, it does end up kind of burning her social capital along the way. And again, we're still so early on the season that her star is just going to be taken down the road anyway. So I think her fighting this endless fight to try to keep her star the entire season just felt kind of pointless, even though I do get it on paper. Obviously, I think she's worried about the situation, that what happens if her star is taken, then she's just completely shut out moving forward, where again the only way for her to actually get a star would be for her to be in the bottom and be voted in by other people, to where again if they know that Cara can get a star through being thrown in, they might not throw her in. And the only other way is for someone that is thrown in to give her a star, which is also not particularly likely. So again, I get why she is worried, but I do feel like that all is a pretty niche situation, especially when we're only at the halfway point in the season. But anyway, we get the nominations. We're getting to easy vote for Steve and Keefla, but we do get more of a debate on the women's side of things, with it being a battle between these 2 sides, with Ryan siding with Cam's plan, saying that this isn't the Cara Maria challenge, but I guess it's the Cam challenge because he's just doing whatever Cam wants, which again doesn't matter anyway, as Kara ends up getting her way anyway, and her being able to pull over Avery and Adam and really strong-arming them and voting for Jasmine and Veronica. So while she does get her way here, it does really show the rest of the other players how aggressively she's playing here, leading to us seeing Flora call her a little baby with a diaper full of shit. Oh, Nicole says that she's playing a selfish game and that someone needs to take that star from her, something that Nicole doesn't do. But anyway, we do get to the elimination, which has them wrestling over a bundle of rope. Obviously a very physical challenge here, and one that instantly we see Nicole decide to throw herself in. This obviously just being a challenge completely suited towards her, which this ends up being a pretty great moment here of her first asking Jasmine or Veronica if anyone wants to make a deal, only for nothing to really come from that, but she does decide to initially swap with Jasmine, leading to Veronica being upset here, and Nicole calling her out for working with Kara, only for Veronica to say, "That's crazy, and I would never work with Kara. That doesn't even make sense." Only for Nicole to then change her mind for some reason, going against Jasmine instead, which was just very strange. Again, everyone here was pretty confused, and Veronica does say that she miraculously saved herself, and this is one of her slickest moves, when it's like, what'd you even do? I guess you spoke up. Again, none of this actually should matter. I don't even understand at all why Nicole makes this decision here, but anyway, the actual matchups here were actually kind of boring, where Keithla versus Steve was pretty obvious that Steve was going to win with him being a former wrestler, and again, Keithla having kind of this farewell edit throughout this episode, all while Nicole versus Jasmine is very apparent what's going to happen there, as Nicole just drags Jasmine along with the rope to the other side. Where with that, obviously Nicole ends up getting Jasmine's star in this situation, all while Steve now has the choice of who to give the star to. And I can't believe it, he gave it to Ace. What a shocker. But obviously this ends up being a mostly palatable decision here, one that I don't think anyone's truly upset by. Where he has this reason for picking Ace. Ace is the only person to not go against him in episode 1. Mixing that with the fact that this essentially becomes a star for grabs in the following episode. I don't think anyone ended up being that upset at this decision. But with that, we obviously lose 2 people here, so let's talk about the boots. Starting it off with Keithla, and I do really like Keithla on this season. I mean, again, he was a very likable figure. Again, someone that was so cool to see back from his last appearance back in season 2, where, again, it's genuinely insane that someone from that far back is on a modern season of the show, to where, again, while he's obviously up there in age and didn't really have much potential long-term in the game, it was still cool to see him back. It's also like a perfect fit for the All-Star theme. Again, I think he perfectly fits into what this show is all about. And because that, was very excited to see him here and would not be opposed to see him back, even though, again, I don't know how much potential there really is for him to win the game. And with that, let's now talk about Jasmine, who also similarly, I don't think has any shot at winning this game, but is also still really fun TV. I thought this was actually probably one of Jasmine's better seasons, where I thought in this season she was really great in the confessional, had some really great digs at Kara in particular. She also seemed to be playing pretty well. I mean, despite the fact that she's obviously booted at around the halfway point in the game here, again, she seemed to be decently insulated in the game, having a decent chunk of allies. Or again, like, Kara had to really strong arm a lot of the players to throw Jasmine in here. And again, a lot of the reason why Jasmine seems to be thrown in here is just simply because she had a star in a spot where Kara wanted to protect her star. And I thought this was actually a pretty good season for Jasmine, even though obviously it doesn't end up going too well for her by the end of it. But with that, we then move on to episode 7, which straight up was one of the slower episodes of the season, with it ended up being a guy's day and primarily focusing on a lot of the men of this cast, which again were not as interesting as the women. But we literally start off the episode with Adam talking about needing to get his star back, so I wonder what's going to happen here. Along with us also seeing him talk to Ryan, leading to Ryan getting personal content on the show finally, talking about now being sober, and again, largely coming off as a sympathetic figure here, all while they get pretty clear this is coming up now because he's probably going to be in danger moving forward. But that's where we also focus on Ace, with Ace talking about how his star is up for grabs, where again, it felt pretty apparent to everybody that Ace's star was probably the easiest one to take without much blowback, to where we see him talking to Brad, calling Brad Superman, only for Brad to talk about how this season's been difficult and how he's been on a slump ever since All Stars 3, which again did not bode well for his chances here. But either way, it leads us to the daily, which ends up being a trivia challenge, where they end up doing it in pairs and in heats for some reason. I don't know why everyone just didn't go at once, but obviously when they're eliminated, they're flung into the water because that's the challenge for you, because I guess people think that's good TV. Obviously ends up being a male elimination day. I really wouldn't have guessed that based on the fact that everyone that was focused on before the daily was a guy. But anyway, this ends up being a very weird trivia challenge where it feels like they just randomly shift topics. Here here we do see Brad getting eliminated first after spelling authority wrong, which again is kind of sad considering he's a teacher. But also again, completely unsurprising considering his edit in the episode. Oh, we also get weird editing here when Cam and Steve get eliminated, with Steve retelling it as if it was a love story, which again is very strange considering Leroy is literally right there. But speaking of Leroy, we do see him being very fortunately paired up with Veronica, who ends up really acing most of the questions here, really winning it for the pair there. So where through that we do see Adam, Brad, Steve, and Ryan in danger here, with Brad saying that he feels safe with the middle group and that he doesn't want to get voted in. Only for us to cut to Ace telling this strange story about a Shaolin monk who gave a star to a handsome knight, which again I wonder what he's talking about. But then talks about wanting to give his star to two strong warriors, calling out Brad and Adam as those people, where we instantly see Brad being pissed here with, again, him not wanting to go in, yet now Ace just throwing him under the bus like this, which has Ace just being completely unaware of what he just did, which is all very humorous. Though really, this doesn't really play that big of a factor, as coming into nominations, Brad was pretty obviously going in anyway. Or considering the field of people that were eligible here, we do surprisingly see a lot of support for Steve and people not wanting him to go down again, which again is surprising for a challenge cast to think that way. But we also see Adam actively want to go in to get a star, while Ryan is the best connected on the board. Where again, it felt like Brad was pretty much going in whether he liked it or not, and considering the fact that, again, people looked at him as a liability as well, to where Kara specifically targets him because of that. Again, it felt pretty obvious he was going to go in anyway. But anyway, coming to the arena, we do have Leroy talking about the possibility of him throwing himself in, only for him to say hell no when actually asked, which again would have been a bad move for him anyway. But the challenge itself ends up being the return of the cheat code elimination, which was supposed to be played when Janelle went home. Again, I can't believe we saw it again, only for it to be a really boring challenge that Adam unshockingly and unceremoniously wins here. Again, who would have guessed it? Also, who would have guessed that he takes Ace's star? I can't believe it. But anyway, through this episode, we obviously lose Brad, who just had a really bad season. I mean, Brad just seemed to be completely out of it for this entire season, where I know he supposedly had a lot of personal things happen in his life right before the season started, and that definitely seemed to play a factor on things, where again, it just didn't seem like his head was in the game. He really struggled with the majority of being part of the losing group, I believe, ever since episode 3, and just again has a very sloppy run on this season, where it is a very strange turn to see from Brad, considering Brad has always been this very consistent competitor, making a deep run on most given seasons, and to see him here kind of go out in a whimper was just kind of a shame. So again, mixing that and the fact we also saw him on 39, not perform particularly well there. Again, it's not looking great for Brad in the modern day, though again, hopefully he has another good run in him at some point down the road. I'm not opposed to seeing Brad back on the show again. I still think Brad is, again, this massive legend of the show, this big staple of the show, where again, he perfectly fits within the All-Star theme, but again, just seemed to be a bit checked out for a lot of this season. But now for episode 8, which we do start off with, who would have guessed it, Leroy and Cam content, them talking to their son and talking about wanting to buy a house, and again, typical personal content for them, though this time it actually does lead to them having a major role down the road. Though here we also get a lot of focus on the Laurel and Kara relationship, with Laurel talking about her conflicted feelings for Nicole with her, only for Kara to recommend her ending the relationship, which again ends up being good advice considering what we learn about the relationship after the fact. But Laurel instead gets upset here, saying that she needs just a listening ear, not advice. to where Nicole sees them talking and calls out Kara for not being a true friend, which is ironic coming from Nicole, with Nicole chalking this up to Kara being obsessed with her, which is funny as we do see Nicole talking about Kara way more than we see Kara ever talking about Nicole. But again, it leads to them bickering, where Laurel is upset at Kara for speaking at Nicole like that, with Laurel consoling Nicole afterwards, saying that Kara needs to realize how she speaks to people, coming from Laurel of all people. Which again, this entire situation felt really ridiculous. It really felt like a situation where Laurel had just like fallen back head over heels over Nicole and was kind of unwilling to see a lot of the warning signs here, to where it did seem like Kara was genuinely trying to help out here and instead gets flack for doing so. But anyway, this leads us into the daily, which is Balls Up, a game that they play as individuals, to where they're inside a mud pit with a net above them that contains balls, and they have to use a plunger to knock out the other players' balls, with the first 4 eliminated in each heat being the losing group, while there ends up being 1 male and 1 female winner. With this also ending up being a women's elimination day, leading to a pretty interesting challenge here. So while the challenge itself, had it been played in a baseline way, would not have been particularly interesting, what does make it interesting is that we do see Cam and Laurel instantly talk how Cam wants to be voted in, wants to get her star, so we see them work together to try to make sure Cara can't protect her star, so Cam can take hers, taking us to Heat 1, where we see everyone working together there to take Cam out first, with everyone just outright plotting the elimination order, which was interesting to see, while Cara was annoyed on the sidelines, knowing what they were doing, and being some pretty impressive play from Cam and getting the entire group to do essentially exactly what she wants throughout this episode. But we do get to Heat 2, where it doesn't as much go her way, to where while we see Cam calling out to do what's best for your game and eliminate who you want me to go against, with, again, I guess her wanting to go against Cara, which again was always a questionable part of the plan. Cara is very fortunate that her Heat here contains Ace and Steve, 2 of her only allies, where they end up helping her here, keeping her out of the bottom, putting her in the middle group as we get to the final Heat, and everyone gangs up on her and she's instantly out there. But this does lead to the majority organizing the rest of the challenge here, which was again kind of interesting to see them give Avery and Ace the win so that they are part of the winning group, and through that do not have a say in the actual vote, while they keep the core members of the main alliance as the majority of the middle group, which would allow them to vote in Cam. Again, interesting strategy here considering the format of this season. For a while, again, I do have qualms with how much power the middle group has. I do think this is an interesting prospect to see these people give the win to their enemies so that they have more power in the game. Anyway, after this, we get more drama between Cara and Nicole, with Cara being annoyed that Nicole's playing against her best interests, where we do see her openly telling Nicole that if her star is stolen, then it just leaves Nicole as the easiest person to have her star stolen next, which again, I think is a correct call to make here, which again, I think is a decent read here. I mean, realistically, I think Nicole had a lot of allies that would have tried to protect her, but I do think the notion of Cara having a star for longer in the game actually is better for Nicole, only for Nicole to just not care and chalk this up as Cara being selfish and just wanting to win everything, leading to more bickering between the two. But with that, we have Avery and Ace winning this challenge, with Avery being annoyed at how everything was planned and says that she feels like a pawn and she's tired of giving people what they want, only to then give people what they want by the end of the episode. But here Cam's plan is to go down against Tina, as for some reason she seems to believe that Avery would only go down if it's against Flora, I guess. I don't know why that makes that big of a difference, especially considering we've seen like a fractured relationship between Avery and Tina, so again, none of this really makes sense based on the show. Though, to be fair, I do think there is the notion of Cam wanting to protect Flora through this, as we do see that they are pretty close, but again, not really explained in any of this. But this does lead to Tina finally telling Veronica to campaign for her, to where she recognizes herself that she wasn't able to get anything through, so we do see Veronica campaigning to Laurel, with Laurel and Nicole being set up as the swing votes, only for Veronica's campaign to be completely ineffective, with Laurel actually being pissed that someone's trying to change her mind, because that doesn't happen in the challenge. But we do get to the nominations, which ends up being a pretty fun sequence here, where we get more fighting between Cara and Nicole, with Nicole being upset at Cara for trying to hold her star the entire game, because how dare she do that, I guess, leading to Cara just openly saying that she'll take Nicole's star if given the opportunity, leading to Laurel entering the fight, saying, "I don't want to hear it," and she aggressively asks Nicole if she's changing her vote, and when everyone says no, she just says, "It's Cam and Tina, bitch," and leaves, which is all really funny to me. But again, even after Laurel leaves, the fight continues here, with Nicole being upset at her taking personal digs at her, only for Laurel to eventually re-enter the fight and tell Cara that she interprets the world wrong, that she doesn't know her and shut up, and all this was really funny. Again, it's just a further example of like how bad Laurel is with people, where again, it's funny that she's upset at Cara for how she talks to people. Yeah, again, based on how we see the show, at least, again, it seems like she's doing worse than anything Cara has done on this season. But either way, I mean, obviously Tina and Cam are voted in. The plan goes accordingly, where we get to the arena, where the challenge ends up being a really lame one here, one that we've literally seen on Big Brother, of them giving trampolines and having to jump to see over a wall and recreate a puzzle. Again, really boring challenge there, though again, we get talk about how Avery has all the power, and Jay even says that if she switches, she would be a legend, which obviously means she doesn't switch. But again, Cam has an easy win here, and ends up stealing Kara's star. Pretty predictable outcome there. But with that, we do lose Tina, who had a very quiet episode for this being her boot episode, which was pretty surprising to see. Again, the challenge usually edits in a way that it becomes very obvious who's going home through the heightened focus on specific people at points where it's absolutely necessary. I feel like Tina didn't really have that here. And I mean, Tina is someone that is kind of just the same as she's always been. I don't feel like the season really changed much. Again, she is still this figure that is pretty bad at most aspects of the game, though is still entertaining at points. I will say I don't feel like she ended up being as entertaining on this season for me, where outside of her like dodo content over how bad she is politically, she really didn't get to do much on this season. So we didn't really get many fights. We didn't really get many witty confessionals from her, to where, again, she was just kind of fine here. Now, I still personally like Tina, and I think she is someone that is perfect for the All-Stars series, someone that perfectly fits into the overall tone of the show, but someone that, I'll be honest, I do think at this point has become a bit stale, to where I don't know if we necessarily need to see her every season. But with that, we get to episode 9. Another pretty strong episode here, one that shockingly starts with the episode focusing on people that don't actually matter to the episode. And probably because they already focused so much on the same people all the time up to this point, to where personal content from them was kind of sapped, where now that we're reaching the end of the season, we do get content from a few different people, and again, some of that is obviously due to the fact that they needed to have them talking about how I need to get a star, which obviously becomes a major focus on the season from this point on. But then we do get more focus on the more important players here, where Kara talks about her connections here, talking about having allegiances with Steve, Ace, Jay, and Ryan, with Steve coming up to her and saying that being friends with her is putting a target on his back, tells her that people are asking him why he hangs out with her, and that people are just anti-Kara, where, again, it definitely became a part of the season here, where it just felt like a good chunk of the house was hating Kara's guts, which, again, wasn't properly explained on the show, where we hear a lot about her entitlement and her being selfish, when it's like, I felt like a lot of that was based around game, to where the fact that so many people take personal digs at her for that just felt very strange. But again, we literally have the next scene having Nicole call her a shit person, and that she has had her name in her mouth constantly, even though, again, I feel like it's the other way around. And we see her confronting Kara, but Kara ends up saying that you made a stupid move, and ends up calling her an idiot, which ends up being this thing that we see like Flora and Laurel be aghast at the fact that she said this, when it's like, don't most people know this? Isn't that what Nicole is known for? For not being particularly smart, but either way. Through this, Laura ends up calling Kara poison, and that she needs to own her game, and that she acts like she owns the game, and that she'll prove to her that she doesn't. Obviously setting up Laurel wanting to take Kara down, which she doesn't do in this episode. But again, we get to the daily, which ends up being another pretty lame one here, of them playing in pairs, and there being 2 heats, where you have to climb up a ladder and run off a plank to grab a ball that lowers your puzzle, and then you have to get the star through the maze. Again, really monotonous challenge to me. So it ends up being another women's elimination day, which does lead to the players themselves being shocked at 2 in a row here. Though again, the challenge is played in 2 heats, with the first heat just seeming to suck at the challenge, missing the ball numerous times, with Cam not even trying in the challenge and giving up, to where we see TJ get pissed at her, though again, I personally don't care, as I don't feel like Cam was going to win this challenge anyway. Oh, we see Kara and Ace win the heats, only for all the top teams to come from the following heat anyway, where the entire first heat ends up being the entire losing group, which was funny. But we do get a lot of content during the first heat of Nicole just mocking everyone sucking, only for her to then also do the same. Though again, she claims that she was throwing the challenge to allow Laurel to win, which, to be fair, I do think makes sense strategically. But again, it's still funny to see her not perform particularly well there, despite it being a challenge that's perfectly suited to her. But again, we do have Laurel and Derek surprisingly winning here. Obviously not that surprising from Laurel's point of view, but Derek ends up turning out to be a decent competitor on this season. But this does lead to Laurel spending the rest of the episode creating this plot to send Kara in and face off against her, which seemed really dumb. Again, like Cam's plan in the previous episode, it felt unnecessary for you wanting yourself to go in against Kara. So while I get that, okay, Kara is a formidable foe, she's going to be tough to beat in elimination, where you'll need a strong competitor in, I don't understand why Laurel specifically wants to take Kara out, and I don't know why Cam specifically wants to take Kara out in the previous episode. I think you should be wanting the other person to take that person out, which again, to be fair, we do see Laurel eventually attempt to do. But again, I think this entire notion of trying to get yourself in against the strongest other competitor just felt very dumb. And again, we do see Laurel have all the power here, really dictating who goes into elimination here, with most people just assuming that Laurel's going to throw herself in, where again, she had a very easy path in picking Flora and Veronica to go in. And in that spot, she just easily wins pretty much any elimination she could have possibly had, to where instead she picks the much harder path, again, all kind of based on her ego and her wanting to shut Cara up. But again, we see Cara be voted in here, all while Cam also gets voted in here, with Laurel promising to swap out for Cam, which obviously doesn't go through, which I would give Laurel a lot of credit for this had this been intentional, had this been the plan all along, as I do think, on paper at least, this is the optimal move to have the other strongest person in the game take out Cara for you. But again, I don't feel like this was intentional, as we do see Laurel really struggling with this decision. But again, we do see Cara being upset, the fact that she's going up against Cam, not even for the reasons of her having a tougher time winning, but also because she seems to genuinely feel for Cam and respect Cam, to the point where, again, I think this just makes it even more clear how wrong Cam's decision was to side with Laurel over Cara was. But again, we get the nominations where everyone ends up voting in Cam and Cara, with, again, everyone assuming that Laurel's going to throw her in. But even if she doesn't, again, it's kind of the best case scenario for everyone else in the game. Again, the three biggest threats on the board at this point in the game are Cam, Cara, and Laurel. And for you to essentially be guaranteeing that one of those three is going home, again, is the optimal move for almost everyone else in the game. To where, again, I think it makes a lot of sense why they do this, though we do interestingly see Jay try to flip the vote onto Veronica and Flora. One, as an attempt to keep Cara safe, but also as a way to keep Nicole's star safe. Which, straight up, I think for Nicole, I think she's one of the only people that has this other interest in this position, where having Laurel go in against Cara is something that is actually not beneficial for her, as if Cara wins, then Nicole's star is going to get stolen, to where there are definitely better paths for Nicole in particular, though obviously she doesn't think that through. But again, we get to the arena where Cam says right beforehand that would be crazy if Laurel doesn't go in, and that she would have wasted 3 opportunities to go in, which I wonder what's going to happen here. To where we get to the arena, which is another pretty mundane challenge here, one that has them having to crawl through a mud pit with a cage on top, and them having to navigate balls through the cage and bring them to the starting point. Again, a seemingly really basic challenge with a really obvious strat here of just taking all the balls to the front at once, and with it seeming relatively easy to maneuver the balls as well. Again, this was not that interesting of a challenge. Though, again, we obviously get to the big moment here of TJ asking Laurel if she wants to get wet, which was a weird way of asking her if she wants to go down. But this is where Laurel says that this isn't the game she was hoping for and decides to not go in for some reason, which, again, kind of obvious based on the editing of the show, but also a very questionable move here. Now, again, she does say that if one of the two, if Cam and Cara go home, that's definitely a benefit for her, which, again, yeah, it is. I think the issue stems from the fact that there's the possibility of Cara winning this, and if Cara does win, then she just gets her star back, meaning that your entire plot that you've been trying to execute over the last few episodes that you finally got through in the last episode was all for nothing, as she just has her star again. So that makes that pointless. Also, by openly burning Cam in this way, you're also potentially burning other relationships in the game. And also, again, you're so close to the final to the point where risking the opportunity to get a star is also very questionable. Now, straight up, again, I think the issue stems from the fact that she threw in Cam and Cara to begin with, where obviously this is not a challenge that you're that favored in against Cam and Cara, who are both going to do well in this challenge. But again, that's why you should have thrown in Veronica and Flora to begin with, where that would give you an easy win here. And also, it's like funny that Laurel's like waiting for a better challenge for her when this is a pretty decent challenge for her. So where, again, against this specific field's a bit more balanced, but again, I don't know what is a better challenge for her outside of something that's just so overtly physical, to where, again, this is a pretty physical challenge, one where you're having to go back up and down to transfer the balls. Again, it's a challenge that Laurel should excel in. I do think this is a spot where if I was Laurel, I would have thrown myself in. But again, we get to the elimination itself, where we do get a fun little moment of Leroy saying, "You got this, babe," to Cam, only for Cara to respond, "Thanks, babe," and give this kind of trolly reaction to it. But again, this ends up being another challenge that, again, if it played out in the baseline way, it would have just been kind of boring. But it does play out somewhat interestingly, where, again, both Cam and Cara obviously utilize the optimal strat of getting all the balls to the end. However, we do see Cam make a mistake here and forgetting a couple balls, to where while she is initially in the lead, she obviously eventually realizes her mistake, allowing Cara to just handily win by that point. to where obviously Kara ends up taking Cam's star in this position, to where we do get this really over-the-top moment as Cam leaves of Leroy running down and the power of love plays. But anyway, with that, we lose Cam, who, again, I've seen a lot of mixed reception online to Cam. Obviously, there are a lot of Cam defenders. There are also people that were very annoyed at how Cam played this season. I'm kind of in the middle of the two. Again, I kind of recognize the fact that, yeah, I think Cam doesn't play particularly well on this season. And while she does have a lot of control over how the game plays out, I don't agree with the decision she makes with that control. However, I thought she also made for pretty good TV. Or again, I thought her rivalry with Kara was really interesting on this season. Obviously, her rivalry with Ayanna was also really interesting. Her being blindsided by Laurel at the end was also fun. To where while I do think her and Leroy were a bit overexposed on this season, I still feel like this was a solid season for Cam, to where, again, considering the fact that she literally just gave birth not too far from when this season filmed, I think it was a very impressive run from her, even though it might not be as good as what certain other people were expecting. Now for episode 10, which did feel like a very strange episode, with a lot of this episode just kind of feeling like it came out of left field. But obviously we start off with the reaction to the Cam elimination, with Leroy saying that this will give him more power, really implying that he's going to go on to win the game and also perform better, even though he ends up performing poorly in this episode. Oh, well, we follow that up with Nicole and Laurel making out, because obviously leading to lots of talk about how dumb it was for Laurel to not get her star, leading to a lot of star talk, which we do hear entirely from the men's side of things, with Jay, Ryan, and Derek talking about needing their stars, while Steve, Leroy, and Adam talk about needing to defend their stars. So I wonder what type of elimination day this will be. This is where we do get the setup of Adam's relationship with Steve, saying that they have kept in touch and they're partners in crime and that they'll continue to push each other, only for that dynamic to flip at the first instance. But anyway, we do get to the daily, which ends up being a strange challenge here. Them being in a shopping cart and have to use a lasso to navigate through a course, which was just, again, strange, but we do see Ace in the lead for most of it, until we see Jay realizing that the rules never said you had to actually use the lasso, and that he could just roll himself to the end by pushing himself off each barrel, which he does use to just snipe the win away, which was really funny. Again, obviously being a move that, again, you would expect to see from someone like a Bananas, but again, just really funny to see him just kind of not do the entire purpose of the challenge. But he ends up winning here alongside Laurel, to where they are then given TJ medals and a wreath and stand on a podium like the Olympics for some reason. But it is funny that despite all this talk about how people need to get their stars, which obviously through doing so, if you don't win, that would mean you have to be in the bottom group, here we actually don't see anyone decide to throw the challenge and try to be on the bottom, leading to Steve and Leroy, again, two of the star holders, ending up in the bottom again alongside Ryan, leading to Jay saying that he wants to go in, specifically against Ryan, leading to a weird segment about them calling each other the Ocelots for some reason. But yeah, we do see a lot of people just assuming that Ryan's gonna be okay with going into elimination, as obviously he needs to go in to get his star, only for him to not be okay with that. Only for us to get this setup to the Ace and Ryan relationship, which again completely comes out of left field on the show, but also seemingly to the players themselves, where even Kara voices confusion over when Ace got so close to Ryan. And Ace did go on to explain why they are so close in a post after the show. But again, all this really comes off just super inconsistent on the show, to where again Ace ends up siding with Ryan here over Steve, who we have seen him be closer to. But anyway, we get to the nominations, where we see Ace really struggling over his vote, not wanting to say a name, even though he eventually says that he can't say Ryan's name and votes in Steve anyway, leading to Steve and Leroy getting voted in here, with Adam also voting in Steve, saying that he is doing so to protect his star, as it will be 2 star holders in elimination. Which, I mean, yeah, that is if Jay doesn't switch, which Jay has constantly said that he's going to throw himself in, where again, I guess at this point, like, Adam's just banking on the fact that Jay doesn't do that, but why wouldn't he do that? As again, this is making it so Jay doesn't get his way and his opponent, but again, from Jay's perspective, like, he feels like he needs a star, so obviously he's just gonna just throw himself in anyway. And this is, again, just essentially him betraying Steve, where obviously Steve is the person that Jay is gonna go against, considering he had to deal with Leroy, to where, again, to me, this plan doesn't make sense, as all this is doing is opening up the possibility of Steve being pissed at you for betraying him and making this feel like a super short-sighted move, where, again, I wonder if that's going to end up mattering as we talk about Steve being pissed at Adam for doing this, where, again, I wonder if that's going to end up mattering. But again, we do get to the arena where the challenge itself ends up having them have to get puzzle pieces from a water tank and then solve this puzzle that is essentially them organizing the pieces in order of their shades, to where this ends up being a challenge that is so terrible for Jay, to where Jay admits in this moment that he is colorblind and through that will struggle with even seeing the shades on the pieces, to where, again, you would think that that would be enough to make him not want to do the challenge, but no, he throws himself in anyway. Which, again, obviously I criticized Laurel for not doing this in the previous episode. Yeah, I do feel like Laurel, having seen the elimination, should have felt pretty confident in that elimination, with it not really emphasizing a major weakness for her. And even then, like, in retrospect also, considering that wasn't the last opportunity, and it works out for her anyway. But again, with Jay here, again, it's a situation where he should know that he's pretty much screwed going into this challenge, to where, again, if he goes in, he's essentially just auto losing due to the fact that he can't even do the puzzle, to where, again, to be fair, he does end up still being able to somewhat perform. So again, I think if I'm Jay in this spot, I would rather take the odds that there is another chance of getting a star than throwing myself in, again, what is the worst case scenario for him. But again, despite the fact that this is a bad move for him, we do see TJ like really propping him up here, talking about this is a new Jay. When it's like, again, it's funny that he's getting really propped up for making a really bad move, but obviously, again, feeling like redemption for his first appearance and the fact that he's showing this courage that he never showed last time. But again, he obviously swaps out with Leroy, sticking to his deal there. And again, in the challenge, we do see him do well in the physical portion, only to then lose all that time at the puzzle, to where even with the other cast members helping him, it's not enough for him to make up that time, to where we do see Steve getting the elimination, leading to Steve taking Adam's star and giving it to Ace. Ace saying, I don't deserve it, which, I mean, you kind of don't. I mean, Ace also voted you in. But to be fair, it's not like Steve had many other good options. But also, it's really funny just how betrayed Adam ends up being here, where Adam talks about feeling betrayed, proceeding to bash Steve's character and says that he'll never answer calls from him ever again, and that this is why you don't have friends in real life, and that you're dead to me, and flicks him off. Which, again, was so over the top and so ridiculous to the point I thought he was joking. Like, this felt like him playing being angry, only for us to get this like more candid moment after that of saying that he can't believe that he's sweating over this asshole, and that's where it felt real. I mean, this genuinely feels insane that Adam is this upset over the situation, considering, again, you just voted Steve in when he thought you were his number one ally. It's like, what do you expect? Or again, it's funny how, like, really Adam's edit up to this point is how he's this new Adam, and he doesn't want to be Adam 1.0 or 2.0, when it's like, this felt like him transitioning back to Adam 1.0, but either way, again, with this episode, we do lose Jay, who I did like on this season. I mean, again, Jay in his first run, even there, I didn't hate him. I always felt like the backlash he got for quitting was a bit overblown, especially considering the fact that they weren't winning that challenge anyway. And even then, like, Jenna had wanted to quit more so than Jay for most of that final, and it was just Jay that gave up at the tail end. But still, like, I do feel like Jay gets a bit overhated for his first appearance, to where, again, I was happy to see him back here, and especially him try to redeem himself. While I think it led to him making kind of a dumb move here, I do still feel like he came off as a largely affable figure. I feel like he's someone that, if he were to come back, I'll be perfectly fine with that, to where, while he isn't the most riveting TV, I feel like he's also a largely affable presence, to where I wouldn't mind him back in the rotation. And now we're episode 11, which starts off with a bit of a strange previously on, where the entire cast is doing it together, and we get this weird banter between them as they struggle to get it started. But obviously, through the beginning of the episode, we get a lot of focus on people needing their stars, with Adam, again, still coming off as extremely bitter, saying that Steve betrayed him for no reason, that now he wants to just get to the final to clown Steve, and he wants to get even more than he even wants to win, saying that he wants to fuck with the universe's energy and destroy that fucking clown, which was all very strange content from Adam, especially considering how, again, obviously this is him kind of transitioning out of his more calm demeanor that he had earlier in the season, which all of this doesn't get rectified by the time he goes home, which leaves his overall arc on the season very weird. But here we also get content around Flora, with her still being confused over what the fuck she's still doing there. To where we get a montage of her sucking at challenges. And obviously all this is setting up Flora's later quit, with her just leaving at the beginning of the next challenge, which I wasn't personally bothered by, as again, like, she obviously knew she was going to get eliminated. She had no real chance of getting through it. And to be honest, it kind of felt true to her character to leave in that way. But also before daily, we obviously get focused on the Laurel-Nicole relationship, which does transition us to talk about Laurel, saying that she's hoping for another opportunity to get a star, leading us into daily, where we get the reveal that there is another opportunity to get a star, where 2 new stars are added to the game here, to where the 6 players that already have stars are now guaranteed to make the final, all while the remaining players will now compete for 1 star for the men and 1 star for the women, to where, from my point of view, I feel like this is a pretty perfect way for them to conclude this portion of the game, to where I think it gives incentive and obviously gives reward for you having gotten a star beforehand, while also not completely screwing over players that didn't get the opportunity to get a star. As again, with the way that this season was formatted, it was one where you could technically shut out a player if they had just constantly been in the middle group with no real opportunity to do anything there, to where, again, I do like that this gives them a second chance, that this still allows for this last opportunity to get a star, even though I felt like the challenge itself here was mostly boring, with it being relatively short of them racing to raft and then having to row to get a key and then use the key to open a trough where they look for their star. Again, a pretty boring challenge here, where outside of this weird dichotomy of those that already had their stars like lounging on the side, to where we get this like poppy summer music playing as we see them just watching the others fight for their lives, it really didn't lead to much entertainment here. But unsurprisingly, Laurel ends up winning this for the women, while Derek ends up winning this for the men, which again, another impressive showing from him. But it's in this moment where we see Kara saying that she's happy that Laurel made the final, as now she can beat her and that there will be no doubt who is the best. Which, I mean, doesn't age particularly well for Kara, but it is a comment here that clearly sets up this Kara versus Laurel dynamic, which obviously becomes the main story of the final. But with this challenge, we obviously do get Adam, Avery, Flora, and Ryan all purged out in this instance, where we might as well just talk about them now, starting it off with Adam, who, again, I liked during the early portions of the season. I felt like he seemed like this guy that had actually genuinely changed from how he was back in the day, to where I thought that was cool to see, but also see his old self kind of lash out at the very end of the season was also kind of interesting as well, to see him having this like very over-the-top reaction to Steve betraying him. And through that, again, I thought there was some intrigue here, and again, I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of this on a future season. Again, I didn't mind Adam's role in this season, where while he wasn't the biggest character in the world, I did feel like he kind of fits the All-Stars tone, again, having not been around in a while and him finally returning, again, having a pretty solid performance here. So I think he perfectly fit the season. Next up, we then get Avery, who had just a weird role in the season. Now, again, I was personally really excited to see Avery on this season. I actually really liked her in her original run and thought she was someone that had so much potential, but obviously just never came back to the show. And it seemed like she kind of missed her shot there, to where, again, finally seeing her back, I was super excited to see it, only for her to just be kind of a dud here. I mean, again, I still find her to be a largely affable presence, but she didn't really do anything interesting on this season, and largely talked about how she wanted to make a move and then just never actually made any moves. So again, I was pretty underwhelmed with Avery's role on this season, but again, she's still a likable figure, but one that I'm just kind of worried isn't really meant for reality TV anymore. Then we got Flora, who, again, I already talked about this before, that again, it seemed like a lot of people were annoyed by Flora by the end of this season, and the fact that she didn't really do anything on this season. Yeah, again, I still found her role here pretty interesting. I still liked her cutting confessionals at points. I still think the fact that, again, she did survive all the way to the tail end of the game is pretty impressive, considering the fact that she had no relationships coming into this, to where, again, we see the likes of Keithla being thrown in constantly, to where the fact that Flora never gets thrown in is pretty impressive, though, again, to be fair, that's largely because there was a lot more conflict on the women's side of things that led to other people going down. But again, I thought this was a pretty interesting season for Flora here. Now, again, don't need to see her again. I don't think there's really much to get from her on another appearance, but I felt like on this season, again, she perfectly filled her role. Again, being this OG that hadn't been on the show in years, I thought it was cool to at least see her back here. And finally, we then get Ryan, who, again, was fine. Again, a largely affable presence, had some decent confessionals at points, but really outside that, doesn't really bring much to the show. I think plays the game in a way that is just not particularly interesting. Usually it's just there to enable the majority, and doesn't really have a voice for himself, doesn't really do much to stick out outside of the fact that he builds these social connections that keep him safe in the game, but doesn't really do much with that power. He was just kind of simply there. Again, I don't dislike the guy, but I just also don't think he makes for the greatest TV either. But with that, again, the episode isn't over yet, to where we do also start the final in this episode, with it coming off very underwhelming in this episode, where at the beginning we do get a nice recap of the finalists, with this being an interesting grouping to make the final here, many of them either having never been to a final or having not been in a final in a while, where again, learning the fact that Veronica hasn't been in a final since Inferno 2 was genuinely insane to me. But the final does start with TJ arriving in an RV and tells everyone to get in, to where he drives them to their location, which was all very strange. Again, so surreal to see TJ driving an RV with the players in the back and all acting as if they're this dysfunctional family. But eventually they arrive at a warehouse where you learn the format of the final, which will start with a series of checkpoints that are essentially just their own mini dailies that were just kind of boring to watch here, or one of them will end up doling out an advantage that was mostly just a waste of time, while the other will eliminate a player along the way. To where I don't mind this format, especially as it again narrows down the finalists in a spot where it allows the people that finish the final to get more of the very small secondary prize, as less people are going to be there by that point. With these challenges also being pretty equal opportunity, it was also, again, not an egregious format here, but also one that, again, wasn't particularly interesting. I think for the final of a show, you would still want it to feel like the most difficult part of the season, when instead here we're essentially just having them shoot targets from the top of a moving car and then just moving a ring through a star-shaped track that electrocutes them. Again, that's not the most riveting TV here, with it also just coming off, again, very lame for a final, and it not seemingly requiring much skill to it. And again, just ends up being a pretty boring segment here, where we do see Leroy winning the advantage, and truth be told, again, the only entertaining bit of all this was the fact that Leroy did at least try to mess with the other players, where we do see him like pretending like he did poorly in the shooting section to kind of mess with people's heads, and also during the electrocution section, he would just pretend yell out in pain to make the others think it's way harder than what it really is, where again, that was fun content, but really most of this did not do much for me. But the episode does end before the actual elimination itself, with Laurel and Derek being at the bottom, with Derek clearly going home, as again, obviously Laurel's not going home here, considering the entire finals basis is around this Carl-Laurel dynamic. So again, Derek obviously goes home at the beginning of the next episode, where we might as well talk about him here. And again, I like Derek. I always found him to be a largely affable figure, but in a way, he's just, again, another version of Ryan, where obviously they are really close friends, they work together the entire time, and again, their roles on the season were pretty much the same. They were just kind of in the background. Really, even then, Ryan got a lot more content than Derek. I feel like we got more personal segments from Ryan across the season, while Derek was just kind of there. But again, he did perform well on this season for what that is. Again, while he's never been particularly good at eliminations, I did feel like he very much impressed me in terms of dailies, where again, he comes out of the season with the most amount of daily wins for a guy, which again is impressive for someone like Derek, to where again, I was not expecting that from him. So because again, he surprised me on this season, where again, I wonder how good it'll be when we see him down the road. Now we get to the finale, where, what a shocker, Derek is eliminated right away. I never would have guessed. Though in this instance, we actually do get the announcement of another aspect of the format here, with them revealing that every eliminated player will be able to give out a star to a player remaining in the game, and in essence giving them an advantage in day 2 of the final, and something that ended up being pretty controversial here. A lot of people seem to be very upset at how this played out and how big of an advantage it seemed to be, though I'll be honest, I personally didn't mind it. And to be fair, I do think it plays out in probably the worst way it could have, but I do think the initial twist itself is not inherently bad. Again, we've had this style of thing numerous times in the past where people had advantages and certain aspects of the final, and considering how focused this season was on stars, and you always had the ability of giving them to other players, and how just in general this season seemed to be a lot more focused on social connections, I do feel like, again, this fits with the theme of the season. I personally didn't mind this was here, but obviously Derek ends up giving his star here to Laurel, and really the wide number of people giving their stars to Laurel ends up being a major reason why this ended up being controversial, and that it greatly benefited her to the point where she pretty much solely wins because of this aspect of the final. So I could see why that is underwhelming, though I did actually like this as a symbol of it's actually showing us how much Laurel has shaked up her game, is playing a more social game, which again, the season does constantly reiterate at points. We do hear Laurel talk about this, however, we never actually see it, and I think that's probably for me the more underwhelming aspect of all this. The fact that I do feel like this season's story could have been more concise if they actually bothered showing us more of Laurel's connections with the others, instead of just primarily focusing our connection with Nicole, where I think if we had seen her connections, I feel like this outcome would have been a lot more satisfying, where instead it just comes off as kind of underwhelming with some of these relationships not really feeling like they were full formed on the show. But anyway, we get to checkpoint 2, where we get another advantage challenge, it being spicy foots, them having to lift their foot to eat 10 peppers, which is such a dumb challenge here. And this really felt like a really pathetic challenge, one that must have been so cheap to make here, and one that in general kind of made this feel like a parody of the challenge at this point, with just nothing being taken seriously. Again, Nicole ends up winning that, and we get to the next challenge, which is somehow just as ridiculous, of them getting this marionette sort of system that they utilize to throw water in their faces that they have to catch with their mouth and spit into a tube, which again also felt like a really dumb challenge there. And again, really just so surreal to see someone actually get eliminated because they couldn't catch water in their mouth in this instance. And with that, we do see Leroy getting anticlimactically eliminated here, which also felt really underwhelming considering his storyline, where so much of his story at this point was how much he needs to get that money, and for him to leave before he gets any money was also very weird. And we do also have him like strangely giving his star to Steve, which also comes out of left field, where I feel like we never saw a single relationship segment between him and Steve, and for Leroy just to be leaving this season talking about how much he respects Steve just felt very out of left field. But either way, with that, we do lose Leroy, who has a rough season here. I mean, this was definitely not a great showing for him. Obviously, this is the first time after retirement, and it was cool to see him back. And again, I still like him on the show. I have no qualms with him being back on the show. However, in terms of his actual challenge performance, I mean, again, this was very rough. Again, some pretty poor daily performances. Obviously, he did win elimination, so good on him for that. But really, outside that, didn't really do much on this season, where I feel like obviously Cam seemed to do a lot more of the legwork for most of the game, and really at the end, he was just kind of skating through due to him having, again, some pretty solid relationships, so good on him for that. But obviously, a pretty underwhelming run from him, but one that, again, I still don't mind him being on the show at this point. But with that, we get to checkpoint 3, where we get the final advantage checkpoint of them having to play in pairs and play hose ball, where they use a hose to push a ball through a goal. And this was also kind of lame, but at least it did give us TJ Lavender. TJ dressed up as like an 80s game show host, so I mean, that's something. And we did get some drama from Steve blocking Nicole and Laurel, with Laurel being clearly looked at as the biggest threat at this point. Though through that we see Nicole being upset, which is kind of funny considering this is pretty much exactly what she did to Cara earlier in the season. Now she's upset at these sort of tactics being used against her. But anyway, Ace and Cara end up winning this, giving them a pretty massive advantage coming into the following round, which ends up being a pretty interesting game there of Bluff Night, which is a double elimination checkpoint that comprises of 3 rooms, where each player has to choose between the 3 rooms, with each room having a different game. However, each room can only be picked twice, and the winner of the previous challenge gets to pick the order here, where bottom 2 times end up being eliminated, to where I actually did think this was kind of a cool challenge. Now, not a very challengey challenge. I feel like this feels more in line with what you would expect from certain other shows, but again, still cool to see here. I did get played out in a pretty interesting way, though. The challenges that we do have here end up being the choice between hammering 3 nails down, which is kind of lame, or rolling a ball down a track, which also kind of lame, but also, again, very crapshooty there. Or the one that was clearly the easiest, and the one that we do see Cara and Ace go for and easily succeed in, which was lighting stars on fire and then throwing balls at them, which, again, seemed really easy. But again, we get a lot of intrigue here from them proceeding to tell Steve to pick the ball challenge, thinking the ball challenge is the easier one over the nails, which also has a pretty humorous visual through this of Laurel trying to listen in their conversation and really leaning in to do so, which is funny. But anyway, we get some intrigue from the fact that Steve doesn't pick the ball challenge and decides to pick the nail challenge instead. So while we then proceed to see Veronica and Nicole pick the ball challenge, leaving Laurel with the nail challenge by default, actually leads to Laurel kind of lucking out in the fact that she ends up being left with what is actually the better challenge, as we do see both Nicole and Veronica get eliminated here, where, again, I do think the very crap-shooty nature of the ball challenge, the fact that you have to run back down, the reset the ball, again, probably wasted enough time in that instance. But again, this is where we do see both Nicole and Veronica give Laurel their stars, which, again, from Nicole, not entirely surprising, though from Veronica was a bit of a surprise, where again, I feel like they did none of the setup for that relationship at all, where at least there was a little bit more setup with Derek. I feel like the Veronica pick really comes out of left field. But obviously, again, like her having these 4 stars ends up essentially giving her to win in this spot where I actually do wonder if Cara just outright had the wrong, obviously the best move would have probably been to try to get Ace and Steve out along the way and get them to give her their stars, or at least, again, not give it to Laurel, to where, again, I think through that, obviously, that would have given pretty much everyone a better shot in the game. Though, obviously, there's no real way for them to predict that. I don't think they even knew how important the stars would be, and really how much of that would have been really in her control anyway. But with this elimination, we do also get a pretty funny ending to the Nicole-Laurel relationship, with them talking about how they're going to figure things out and how there's no tension between the two anymore, which, again, doesn't last for too much longer. But with that, obviously, let's stop down and talk about the two people eliminated here, starting it off with Nicole, who was just kind of more of the same on this season. Again, someone that does get into arguments, someone that, again, we saw a lot of drama between her and Cara. That was cool. I think her relationship with Laurel, though, again, was just kind of overexposed to the point where it was just not particularly interesting. I feel like we didn't really get much conflict between them after the first few episodes, to where, again, for me, it really didn't bring much to the show. But I actually don't mind Nicole. Now, I don't necessarily like her really at all. However, I do feel like she does bring enough to the show, and again, gets into fights to where, again, I think she's interesting enough to where I don't hate the fact that she continues to be cast on the show. But also here we end up losing Veronica, where, again, this ends up being Veronica's best season since Inferno 2, which is pretty insane. That's been that long since she made a final. And again, Veronica is just kind of Veronica at this point. I mean, again, very affable social figure, someone that I think most people like. Again, her actual position in the game is obviously very variant based on who else is there, where I think there's many instances where she's just kind of on the outs because no one really knows her. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a house that did benefit her, while also mixing out of the format really incentivize you to take out big threats in the game. I do feel like Veronica kind of skated by through that. But again, decent showing for Veronica, and too fair considering how equitable the comps are. I mean, who knows if she could have won this challenge, even though by the time of day 2, I doubt she would have performed particularly well in that. But again, Veronica is someone that I do like on the show, even though I don't think she really brings the entertainment that she used to. But following that, we get the only real downtime in this entire episode as we see them sleep in a cargo net for the night, to where we get probably one of my favorite moments of this entire season, which really just comes out of left field, of Ace getting content, being able to talk about why he wants to win the game, to which he gives probably the most insane answer he possibly could have given here, and that he wants to win to buy a thermal mineral magic spring that the Native Americans use for 10,000 years that they believe can cure all ailments of disease, and he's going to reopen that spring and save the world. Which is, like, again, the best response to this question anyone has ever given in the history of reality TV. I think before this, again, you had like the dog bar and Survivor. I think this tops it. I think this is by far my favorite answer at this point. It's just such a ridiculous final character moment for this season. But either way, we get to day 2 of the final, which ends up being a more typical final format, but definitely one on a smaller scale, with it entirely comprising of a scooter ride down a mountain that has them then having to complete a star loop, which is essentially a loop of checkpoints where they incrementally add a checkpoint every loop, and these checkpoints themselves were just kind of lame, and after that they just have a sprint to the actual finish line. Really, all in all, again, very much felt like just a mini final in a normal season of the challenge. Yet I do think this plays out interestingly, specifically because of obviously the addition of stars, where the way the stars are utilized here is that you're able to use them once per loop to skip a checkpoint, which obviously pays major dividends, and how this final plays out, where we do see Laurel being able to use her 4 stars on the second checkpoint for all but final round, which ends up being a pipe puzzle that seemingly took a decent amount of time, while she also was able to skip the final checkpoint as well, which I should mention the fact that it's funny that this final checkpoint was only played by one player by the end of it, and even that was by accident. But again, that obviously ends up being a massive boon to her, something that really benefits her in this final, which puts her in the lead for the majority of it, though we do see Steve performing pretty admirably here, again, being the first to even get to the loop to begin with, and despite him not using any of his stars, he actually ends up being tied with Laurel by the time they get to second checkpoint in the final loop, only for him to then surpass her and decide that now is the time for him to use his 2 stars, using it on checkpoint 4, and then planning on using it on checkpoint 5 until he realizes that he made a very dumb mistake, something that ends up directly costing him the game, seemingly here, and the fact that obviously the rule is you can only use 1 star per loop, meaning that obviously he should have used one of them earlier, but also this now forces him to do the 5th checkpoint, something that seemingly took a decent amount of time, as we do see him go from having a pretty decent lead to being way back in 3rd by the end of it. So you could just clearly tell how pissed Steve was for the rest of this episode, as again, he essentially loses the game through this one decision. Now, I should also mention the fact that something that's like pretty irrelevant to this overall final anyway is the fact that there is also an aspect of this star loop that the last person to finish it ends up being purged, though really that seemed like a part of the format that was simply just there to, again, increase the prize money for the runners-up, where obviously because of that, now only 2 people end up finishing the final along alongside the winner, meaning that they get $25,000 each. Again, a more admirable prize than if 4 people had finished it, where because that Ace gets purged, to where Ace does have a pretty humorous final in the fact that during the eating portion, he ends up feeling bad for the cockroaches, and we even end the episode with a cut back to him releasing the cockroaches, which was a ridiculous scene in itself. But obviously, again, it does end up technically coming down to Kara and Laurel, though Laurel was clearly winning, with it not seeming to be particularly close, with Kara actually being way back in third for the majority of the challenge. But once Kara does arrive, we actually get this pretty good moment between the two that, again, probably doesn't last nowadays, considering we know that they're back on bad terms. But we do get Laurel finally seeing Kara as her equal and saying that they're both in varsity now, a reference to a comment that she made about Kara being in JV back in Cutthroat. And again, oh, that's a really nice moment. Again, if only it lasts. But overall, I just feel like the season kind of ends on this weird note here, where there's just a very strange final, to where the fact that Laurel ends up winning is not necessarily the worst outcome in the world, but the fact that she wins in the way that she does, again, it's a little bit underwhelming, especially when I feel like Kara and Steve had more fulfilled storylines throughout the rest of the season, where Laurel just didn't feel like as important of a character to the season's storyline. Again, it felt like her storyline also was just kind of shallow by the end of it as well. But with that, again, we'll still run through the finalists here and talk about my thoughts on them along the way, starting it off with Ace. And I actually liked Ace on this season. I mean, Ace is someone that I've always been fine with throughout challenge history. I always feel bad for him because he's very typically a first boot, but to see him now get to another final, again, I thought he had a pretty good season here. Again, he was pretty consistently towards the top of the pack in most of the challenges. He also just seems to be a very nice guy. Again, not someone that's probably not meant for reality TV realistically, but I do like having him as this wild card on this cast, this person who, again, just does not really seem to know what's going on in the game, doesn't really even really want to play the game, yet it's kind of just tagging along. And I thought he did have some great character moments as well. And also, again, the reason for why he wants to win the money is still probably one of my favorite character moments in recent challenge. So again, at least there's that. But then we move on to Steve, who I thought had a great run on this season. I mean, Steve is someone that, well, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think he's the greatest challenge competitor. Or while I think he, again, had a solid run here, winning a few eliminations, came extremely close to winning, possibly wins the season if it had not been for his little mishap. I do feel like Steve is also not facing off against the best competition on this season, where, again, I don't think he's truly up there, the elites of the main show. I would not expect him to go on the main show and have a real chance at winning, but I think he is a competent competitor here. A much better one than I was expecting of him coming into the season, where, again, I really liked him on All-Stars too. Yeah, Ozzy there, again, he was kind of mixed bag. Won a daily, but also lost the elimination. But again, I thought he really proved himself on this season. I thought he had a really fun arc on this season as well. Again, being this pretty big underdog for the majority of it, while also just coming off as a largely affable guy, where, well, to be fair, I think if he wasn't an underdog, he would not be particularly interesting, as at that point, he would just essentially be a glorified version of Casey. But again, I like him on the show still. Again, there'll probably be a point where he's a bit overexposed, and I probably won't. But as of right now, I do like him on the Challenge All-Stars in particular. But with that, we then move on to Cara Maria, who also had a fantastic season here. Again, very happy to see Cara Maria back in the challenge world, and I do feel like she very much had as good of a return to the show as she possibly could have. Again, came in second, decently close to winning, really was the star of the show throughout the majority of it, with so many people targeting her, and her being able to overcome that despite that, and her even pulling off some decent moves along the way, to where, again, I thought this was a very good season for Cara Maria, and again, I'm very happy to see her back. I hope that she's back to being a staple of the show, and to me, again, I think she would have probably been the more satisfying winner to me over Laurel, where I think her finally beating Laurel would have been a more worthy storyline for this season, to where I think her just outright losing to Laurel at the end doesn't really make much sense based on how the entire story was told. But still, I think she had a great run on this season, someone that definitely was, again, the major star of this season. And finally, we get to the winner in Laurel, who, again, I've never particularly loved Laurel on the challenge. Now, again, she's a very good competitor, and again, at points, a very good character, yet I just never found her to be particularly likable. And while obviously that's not really what I'm looking for all the time in the challenge, I do feel like on this season, again, she did not come off the most likable, and the fact that she goes on the win over the likes of Cara and Steve, again, just feels a bit underwhelming to me, especially when, again, I feel like they had more satisfying storylines than Laurel, which had Laurel's entire storyline be based around her relationship with Nicole, which, again, who cares? Especially considering we know from outside the show that none of this matters anyway, that we're mixing that into the fact that we also know that. So again, that's definitely a major aspect of Laurel's run that I do find underwhelming. However, again, she had a solid season here. I mean, she won a decent amount of dailies. She was pretty consistently towards the top of the pack. I mean, she never went to elimination the entire time. time. Again, seemingly had a very impressive social game, was able to get the target onto Kara and avoid the target herself, unlike Cam was, where again, I think there's a lot of impressive play from Laurel through the main game, though I think her final performance here was, again, just kind of largely crapshooty, which, I'm too fair, it's crapshooty for everybody, considering how crapshooty most of these challenges were, but obviously I think it's a final that, again, she probably doesn't win in most instances. It feels like a spot where obviously she needed those stars to win the game, especially against Steve in particular, though again, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's still a solid win. Again, I do think she played a competent game here, though again, I do wonder how much that was just due to the wonky formatting and also the not particularly strong cast that this season had, to where they just come out of the season being a bit whelmed with Laurel's win as a whole. But with that, again, that is the entire season. Challenge All-Stars 4, a season that, again, I liked at points. I also didn't love at points, though I feel like it was never like entirely bad. I feel like it was a solid season of the challenge, to where, well, I'm sure there were a lot of people that are disappointed with this, especially considering how much hype there was coming this season and how much we know that was left on the cutting room floor. Yeah, again, I still like this season. Again, I don't think it really matched the expectations that most people had for it, but I still think it brought some pretty good TV at points. I thought there was still, like, again, some fights here and there. There was definitely some interesting gameplay. Again, I thought the format was definitely really interesting, to where, while I do think the overall storytelling of it could be a bit better from my point of view, I did find the season as a whole to be largely decent here, especially for Modern Challenge, which I've obviously talked a lot about not being particularly great. I think it's amongst some of the better spin-off seasons of the show. But with that, again, those are my thoughts on Challenge All-Stars 4. Now moving forward, I'm going to end up doing a video that I've been planning on doing for a while that I just never got around to, but finally going to do it now, and that's my spin-off ranking for the challenge. I don't know when exactly that video will come out. However, that is something I do intend on releasing between now and probably at some point before the end of the year. But again, that's a video I intended on doing like 2 years ago, back when I did my initial season ranking. We continuously got spin-off after spin-off after spin-off, to where it never felt like there was a really great time to stop down and do it, to where, I mean, I probably should have just done it after World Championship, but then we knew All-Stars 4 was happening and it took forever for the season to come out, to where and now we know All-Stars 5 is happening. But either way, I feel like now is the time I'm going to stop down and do it, because if I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it? So again, I'll be doing that video at some point. Straight up, I don't know how many other challenge videos there'll really be outside that, and again, the upcoming 40 review when that eventually airs. Obviously, outside that, again, still expect the typical content you can expect from the channel. Obviously, more of Survivor and Big Brother content along the way. But for now, those are my thoughts on the challenge All-Stars 4. Thank you for watching.